Dawn. My name is Joel Chacha, and today, being on a Wednesday, we have a special focus on the Finance Bill 2024, which its first reading took place on Monday during the special sitting of the National Assembly, basically unpacking the whole Finance Bill 2024. Remember, what's a finance bill? It's a money bill that accompanies a budget. That one enables a government to be able to finance its budget. For instance, we're talking about the next financial year, which will begin from 1st of July 2024 to the end of June 2025. In this case, we call it the financial year 2024-2025. This particular 2024 finance bill seeks to finance the budget by a whopping 323 billion Kenya shillings. And just to highlight what is contained in that particular bill, which you'll also be able to give your comments, your views, and as well your proposals, even as, of course, the National Assembly will be opening a window for public participation. Basically, you will be able to give your views and they will be considered. That is also through submission of memoranda before the Finance and National Planning Committee, chaired by, of course, Kuria Kimani, who is the Molo Member of Parliament. Now, what's contained in this particular Finance Bill 2024, keen to note, is the removal of the zero-rated, of course, of some of the products, including bread. This means they will now be subjected to 16% VAT. For instance, for 400 grams of bread, there is a possibility it will hit a 10 shillings hike. Just imagine. That is the implication of removing the zero rate on bread and imposing a 16% VAT on it. Also, something else to note is the 2.5% tax on motor vehicles. What does this mean? If you own a vehicle, a private one, every year you'll be required to party with between 5,000 and 100,000, depending with the value actually of your vehicle. So for instance, you have a vehicle that is, let's say, with a net worth of 10 million Kenya shillings, its value. Then 2.5% of that, of course, it's more. But the maximum you're going to pay in this particular motor vehicle tax will be 100,000 Kenya shillings. But the minimum, in case perhaps you believe your vehicle is old and not really, you know, its value is not really expensive, you still be required to pay a minimum fee of 5,000 Kenya shillings annually. So just imagine, for the 4% premium on what you pay on insurance, 2.5% will be topped up. In this case, you'll pay a whopping 6.5% annually for your vehicle. That, of course, is what is contained in this particular Finance Bill 2024. And also keen to note is the tax or the imposition of VAT on some of the banking services. This means when you deposit a check, for instance, of 1 million from a given circle, let's say, for instance, MediaMark circle, of 1 million Kenya shillings, then 160,000 Kenya shillings will go to the government as tax, even as other banking services charges will also increase. This is what will form our discussion this morning with my key guests in studio. That is Honorable Esther Passaris, County MP, Nairobi, in other word, the Nairobi Woman Rep, as well CPA Julius Ruto, who is the Member of Parliament, Keses. He's also a member of the Finance and National Planning Committee. Honorable Geoffrey Ruku will also be with us. He is the Mbeere North Member of Parliament. Ruth Kinyanjui, an economist, and as well Honorable Dr. Babu Owino, who is the Embakasi East Member of Parliament, as well sits in the Budget and Appropriations Committee of the National Assembly. All those will be here, but I also invite your feedback via social media platforms at K24 TV, at Joel Chacha, as well on our SMS and WhatsApp numbers on the bottom of your screens. Of course, I'll be sampling some of them before wrapping up New Dawn this morning. But as usual, we begin with the newspaper review, and on the People Daily, which is Kenya's #1 free newspaper owned by MediaMark Limited, which also actually owns a K24 TV, splashes this morning of a fresh crisis as Treasury cuts 15 billion for JSS. That's the capitation for junior secondary schools has been slashed, even as teachers stage protest against TSC refusal to employ them on permanent and pensionable terms. Remember, so far they're not on the PNP. This also, even as the government, of course, looks at having the wage bill at 35%, the conversations are there of whether actually the civil service should be more of a contract-based terms and not the permanent and pensionable terms. But of course, People Daily this morning highlights of the fresh crisis as Treasury cuts 15 billion for JSS. This is on page 4, of course, matters concerning budget. And just to peruse it quickly on page 4 of the People Daily, remember you can grab your copy along the major highways in Nairobi, but as well the e-paper, of course, you can see on the bottom of your screens. Make sure you download and, of course, peruse it further. Crisis looms as Treasury slashes 15.4 billion JSS funds, while learners are staring at a crisis after the National Treasury slashed monies meant for junior secondary school, that is JSS, and school feeding programs. Now, lawmakers who sit in the Education Committee, chaired by the Tinderet Member of Parliament, Julius Meli, were shocked to learn that the Treasury had reduced capitation to JSS by a whooping 15.4 billion Kenya shillings, thus affecting 1 million learners. Lawmakers also had that an entire budget of 4.9 billion Kenya shillings meant for the school feeding program had actually been done away with, thus putting at risk the lives of 4.5 million learners who depend on school meals to remain in school. The budget cut for JSS is the latest setback for a sector that has been paralyzed by the ongoing strike by teachers. Remember, schools reopened on Monday after the Easter long holiday. On a day, junior secondary school teachers actually started their demonstrations or held their demonstrations across the country to protest the refusal by the TSC, that is the Teacher Service Commission, to employ them on permanent and pensionable terms. The intern teachers accused TSC of defying a court order that had instructed it to employ them and vowed to stay away from schools in a bid to paralyze learning. Remember, this is coming on a backdrop of the doctor's strike that had actually gone for more than 50 days, and we saw, of course, negotiations there. And at some point, the president met the KMPDU leadership at State House, Nairobi, just, of course, to engage on these on matters, of course, labor issues. And at least it's a relief for millions of Kenyans who are seeking, of course, health services from various government hospitals. Well, this is what, of course, the People Daily splashes this morning. And back to the cover page, just to highlight perhaps, how do you wonder, or how did we get here in terms of this budget cut in the education sector? As it stands, a whopping 144 billion Kenya shillings has so far been cut in President William Ruto's maiden budget, that is 2022-2023, and these, of course, are just the effects in various sectors. Of course, the Education Committee coming out to decry the 15 billion that has so far been cut from it. There is a supplementary budget too that is before the National Assembly for consideration that seeks to cut a whopping 144 billion Kenya shillings in Ruto's maiden budget. Still on the same cover page of the People Daily, MPs demand probe as Linturi bribery claims. Remember, this is a story that I have been following closely, and the allegations came out. This is, of course, being on page 5 of the People Daily, just to peruse it, written by People Daily's very own Masi Mwai, where a section of lawmakers now want actually thorough investigations into claims that money changed hands with a view to exonerate Agriculture and Livestock Cabinet Secretary Mithika Linturi from blame in the fake fertilizer scandal probe. In particular, the MPs demanded that the Powers and Privileges Committee, as well as other investigative agencies, such as the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, that is the EACC, be seized of the matter as it had been put, as it had put Parliament to shame. Remember, this as far as, of course, the impeachment motion against Agriculture Cabinet Secretary Mithika Linturi, who the 11-member select committee actually find out that the 3 grounds that had been put forth by the Bumula legislator Jack Wamboka were all unsubstantiated, and thereafter claims emanated as of whether they were bribed 5 million Kenya shillings. But remember, these are just allegations, and there was none that was made on the floor of the House. MPs who spoke, they spoke at the media center while addressing the press. But remember, of course, the National Assembly Speaker Moses Wetangula told the MPs that should anyone suspect bribery was involved in the Mythika's probe, then they could come up with a motion to push for investigations, of course, towards the same. This, of course, is what the People Daily also touches on this morning. Back to the cover page, Mudavadi, our fight for Raila's AU job is on course. That is on page 7. Remember, so far it's not yet clear whether Mudavadi will actually, actually the former premier, that is Raila Odinga, will still be going for the AUC position. It's believed perhaps there are chances he might not really nail it, but Mudavadi says Raila AU post hunt on course. That is the Prime Cabinet Secretary who is actually vouching and, of course, lobbying various states to support Odinga's bid to become the AUC chair. That is on the People Daily. Just quickly to highlight what is also forming headlines on the Daily Nation. Counties face cash crisis. As MPs clash, this is a dispute where counties are staring at a major cash crunch. Should Parliament fail to agree soon on the amount of money to be allocated to the devolved units? Remember, the figure that was initially passed by the National Assembly was 391 billion Kenya shillings as equitable share. That is basically the amount from the total budget, how much goes to the devolved units, that is the counties. 391 billion is what is being proposed by the National Assembly for the next financial year. Currently, counties are receiving 385 billion Kenya shillings. However, the Council of Governors was pleading for 450 billion Kenya shillings, only for the Senate to approve 415 billion Kenya shillings. Remember, these are various figures. So, on this other hand, the National Assembly is saying we can only offer 391 billion. Senate saying only 415 billion. Now, a committee has been constituted to mediate. It's called a mediation committee, so that they get to agree on how much counties will receive in the next financial year. However, governors are adamant that they need at least 15% of the budget, which has never really been implemented as required by the Constitution. This is what the Daily Nation highlights this morning. The Standard newspaper, Ruto gets a dose of Uhuru's bitter pill. At the height of his second term, a frustrated President Kenyatta publicly complained of how actually his deputy was forever campaigning and neglecting his DP role. During this year's Labor Day, it was President Ruto's turn to take a swipe at leaders he said were always seeking popularity instead of serving Kenyans. And also, there is an image there of bread. Raid on bread, Kenyans paying at increasing taxes. Remember, this is what will inform our conversation this morning as we unpack the Finance Bill 2024, and I still invite your opinions via social media platforms at K24 TV, at Joel Church, as well, and SMS and WhatsApp numbers on the bottom of your screens. Remember, in studio, I'll be having Honorable Esther Passaris, who is the Nairobi woman representative, as well CPA Julius Ruto, member of Parliament KSS, and a member of the Finance Committee, which will be looking at this particular finance bill closely, engaging the public to get their views. Also in studio will be Honorable Geoffrey Ruku, who is the Mbeere North Member of Parliament. To join us virtually will be Ruth Kinyanjui, an economist, and as well Honorable Dr. Babu Owino, who is the Mbakasi East Member of Parliament. But before getting to that, let's focus on these stories where the nationwide strike by clinical officers, now in its 45th day, will continue as the union leaders failed to reach an agreement with the Council of Governors in a 6-hour meeting on Tuesday. The leadership will today, midnight, withdraw their staff members from health facilities under the national government. An escalation they hope will prompt the government to address their plight soon. Here now is Ben Kirera with more.
Clinical officers in Kenya are now calling out the government for allegedly ignoring their plight.
The midnight of tomorrow, Wednesday, we will be withdrawing all the staffs anesthetist, critical care, and all the staffs under the Ministry of Health, including those working under the Port Health, those working under Mathare Hospital, those working under KU, Kenyatta University Hospital, those working under spinal injury.
In a meeting with the clinicians' leadership, the Council of Governors agreed that terms under which universal health coverage staff are working need to be revised, throwing the responsibility to the Ministry of Health.
Tuko na wengine wanaitwa cashiers, wanalipwa 18,000. Mtu amefanya degree amemaliza. Alafu yule ambaye ako kwa kandarasi ya kudumu analipwa 1,115. Wanafanya mandhari ni sawa ambao wanafanyia kazi.
The Council of Governors, however, cites a lack of fiscal capacity to hire the 20,000 additional clinical officers as demanded by the union.
The healthcare workers in this country need a central management system where they can directly negotiate or rather get allocation from the treasury to employ.
We are asking for enough clinicians so that you do not have to wait 8 hours in that health center.
The union leadership will tomorrow meet the negotiating team at the Ministry of Health with a key focus on hiring of UHC staff under permanent and pensionable terms as their contracts are set to lapse this month.
Employ more staff to guarantee takeover of the UHC.
To further push for their demands, the clinicians have planned to hold demonstrations every Tuesday. Ben Kerera, K24, Nairobi.
We shift gears now to matters education, where learning activities in Congo Primary School, Kiambu County, has been strained for the second day after 2 man dams burst at their banks, flooding the institution. And as Bentura Komboka now reports, victims of the Mahi flood strategy are yet to resume school for the second term due to the injuries sustained in the tragic incident.
As schools reopening countrywide enters a day 2 for the second term, learning activities at Congo Primary School in Kiambu County has been hampered by floods after 2 man-made dams burst their banks. According to Priscilla Wanjiru, a teacher at the institution, pupils cannot access the school as the entrance is flooded with water that is yet to be diverted.
Our school is very flooded. We have 2 dams. Today, 3 government officials have come. Our MCA, Mr. Muro, he's just here with me. They have assessed the situation. The school is unpassable.
Left with no alternative to gain access inside the school premises, pupils from the institution are said to be faced with the dangers of attacks from hippos residing in the 2 dams that are now roaming freely in the area.
The children are not safe to go there because there can be hippopotamus in those dams. So I ask anyone who is responsible, who is able to come and maybe assist us and put away that water.
According to area MCA Lawrence Moura, SEK Committee Enma Primary School, which is a kilometer away where pupils from Congo could have been relocated temporarily, also faces a challenge of collapsed toilets, further paralyzing resumption of classes.
The environment also should be conducive for the learning purposes. You go to SEK Anima, that is a health hazard. We don't have toilets. There are no toilets for the students. So I would say that we should move. The county government and the national government should fast track and arrest the situation so that the schools are not left behind.
In St. Vincent, Omware, Kisii County, one student who was hurt in Mahi floods incident is yet to join others for the second term due to the injuries sustained while trying to escape flash floods.
We have a few cases. One case of a student who comes from Mahimayu that was affected with what happened there. She's still in hospital, but the parent has communicated to us that soon should be released and should be joining us so that we continue with the studies.
So far, 44 primary schools and 27 secondary schools are yet to reopen countrywide, with 12 primary and 16 secondary schools in Nyeri County shut down due to flooded classrooms and toilets. Bentura Komboka, K24 TV.
Still on the same breath on matters education, over 1.3 million day secondary learners risk lacking third-term capitation this year if government does not increase the proposed 2024-2025 budget by 12.768 billion Kenya shillings and even more worrying actually is the junior secondary school, which is facing a deficit of 15.4 billion under the proposed budget, as Harry Chimea reports.
Serious threats of cancer and what have you.
Presenting submissions before the National Assembly Education Committee following the 2024-2025 budget estimates, it emerged that there lies an underfunding crisis that could derail the implementation of junior secondary school and free education.
It is supplementary supposed to be.
According to the Ministry of Education, to cover all learners in junior secondary schools and issue a capitation of 15,042 shillings to each learner, there lies a budget deficit of 15.449 billion shillings.
On free junior school, there is also an underfunding of 15 billion shillings going into next year, an equivalent of not funding 1 million students at junior school.
And even more worryingly is that there is a 621 million shillings gap towards ensuring there is infrastructure development in JSS. Students who depend on school feeding programs could also miss out, as the budget did not allocate funds towards the program. Yet 4.9 billion shillings is needed to facilitate the program.
So we are asking this House to appropriate resources to feed our children, because that is the responsibility of this House. Free
education also hangs in the balance. In order to ensure primary school learners receive the 1,420 shillings capitation, 9.781 billion shillings is needed, yet there is another deficit of 660 million shillings. Furthermore, 1,381,100 day secondary learners risk lacking funding for this year's third term if the Ministry of Education is to allocate a full capitation of 22,244 shillings. The proposed budget is 63.886 billion shillings, yet 76.654 billion shillings is needed. If the deficit of 12.768 billion shillings is not issued, then learners could receive 18,757 shillings instead of the required 22,244 shillings.
Free-day secondary education, we have a deficit of 12.7 billion shillings, or an equivalent of 540 students who will not be funded if we use the full capitation of 22,000 shillings. But if we were to utilize the 63.8 billion shillings that has been given to us on all the students who are in our high schools, then we shall be funding at an average of 18,757,000 per child.
Harriet Chimea, K24.
Away from that, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission chairperson David Oginde has called on Parliament to amend the legislation to allow the Commission to use part of what they recover in unexplained wealth, corruptly acquired assets and proceeds of crime to meet their budget deficit. EACC is also calling for those suspected to be involved in corruption to be barred from accessing their offices, as this has been a hindrance in the fight against corruption through interference with investigations and alteration actually of evidence. David Kagina has more.
According to the EACC annual report for the year 2022-2023, the Commission was able to trace 6.63 billion in illegally acquired and unexplained assets, out of which 3.8 billion was successfully recovered, increasing the value of the cumulative value of what EACC has managed to recover from 3.6 billion recovered in 2018 to 28 billion by 2023. EACC says financial constraints is one of their major challenges against corruption, and that legislation should be put in place to allow them to use part of what they recover to bridge their funding deficit.
We are proposing that either a percentage of that which has been recovered or an amount that would help us to meet our actual expenditure budget.
The Commission says it is operating at 50% of its staff capacity, which has been a major challenge owing to the number of cases it handles, with at least 5,252 reports received by the Commission for investigation between July 2022 and June 2023. Further, the Commission is calling on Parliament to seal the legal gaps that have been making the fight against corruption hard for the body. This is in addition to complementing Chapter 6 of the Constitution on leadership and integrity by barring persons being investigated on corruption grounds from holding public office until declared innocent by the courts.
They can deny you access to certain documents, to interviewing particular individuals. Intimidation is another one.
According to EACC, it's difficult to investigate and prosecute leaders in office owing to the accused person's ability to interfere with the cases, hence resulting to going after those who have left office and are accused of corruption, dismissing any claims of political witch hunts.
Cases from EACC are watertight. Cases from EACC, they undergo a process. We don't just wake up and say, this case we have investigated, take it to the CEO to sign.
David Kagina, K24, Nairobi.
And as promised, today being on a Wednesday, we focus on the Finance Bill 2024. Already my guests are in studio, or they're actually streaming in studio shortly. Of course, we'll be having this conversation. There is the CPA, Julius Ruto, Member of Parliament, Kesets, also sits in the Finance and National Planning Committee of the National Assembly, which will be actually taking this bill bit by bit and also taking the views, of course, of the public, and later on submit a report before the National Assembly for consideration. Remember as well, Honorable Esther Passaris, the Nairobi woman representative, will be joining us shortly, and as well Honorable Geoffrey Ruku will be right here on this program, in studio in fact, and virtually will be Ruth Kinyanjui, who's an economist, and Honorable Dr. Babu Owino, who's the Embakasi East Member of Parliament, also sits in the Budget and Appropriations Committee. Keep sending in your views via social media platforms at K24 TV, at Joel Church, as well on our SMS and WhatsApp numbers on the bottom of your screens. Do you support the move by the National Treasury seeking to now tax bread? 16% VAT on bread basically means increasing bread 400 grams by 10 shillings. Also, 2.5% motor vehicle tax. Are you supporting that? Just imagine, already you're paying a 4% premium of insurance, then 2.5 additional, of course, to what you've been paying. It is a conversation that we'll be having right here in studio this morning, and to further unpack this particular money bill that seeks to finance President William Ruto's second budget. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
The biggest reggae